speed ahead. We are building an all-metal Tiger 1 tank for RC using parts from Hanglong, RC Tank Legion Shop, Mato, Clark, and Tigan Tanks. Hi, my name's Doug. Let's get back into the build. As you probably remember, I've been tiptoeing around making this upper hull and lower hull fit. We're going to tackle that right now. First of all, let's take a look at where we are. Let's give you a 360 glamour shot. As you see, we've made good progress so far, but you notice we have no wheels. We'll take care of that today too. Now, making the upper and lower hull fit has been a real tricky engagement because there was absolutely no engagement between the two parts when it first arrived. Now, luckily, I didn't have to do any filing at all. The parts really did fit together. It's just that the fastening pieces underneath were not lined up. There was not enough clearance area for them. So what I finally did was made sure that the front fit. Now that was the part that I thought I would have to file, so good news there. Looking in the back, there are these engagement parts, little metal parts on the right and left side, and they should engage when you put them together. However, the tolerances just were not there, so I had to remove these parts and put them back together. But this time I used some washers to lift the bottom ones up and to bring the top ones down a bit. Now it took quite a bit of, putting things on, taking things off, making adjustments, putting things on, taking things off. This is one reason it's always good to have a very ample supply of washers and different screws and nuts in your parts box. And I must say that if you're taking on a project like this, where you're taking a bunch of different parts from different companies and putting it together, the most difficult thing has been getting the fasteners. This is something I would love to see from Tigan and Mato somewhere in their documentation. Anyway, I've been able to get the spacing correct and it snaps right into place, closing the upper and lower hatch. One big project under our belts. If you visit any of the RC Tank blogs or forums like I do, you'll notice that one big question that is asked quite a bit about the Mato, the metal wheels that go on the Hanglong or the Tigan or the Mato tanks, is how do the bearings go in and how do you isolate the bearings from the tightening surface? I only found one image on the Mato site that I thought was helpful. They have put a tube inside each one of the wheels to isolate the bearing from the wheel itself. So that'll be just one of the experiments that I do later on. But first, to make sense of all these wheels. In case you're counting, there's 16 of them, and they're of two different types. So I try to put them in groups of 8, which makes the installation easier. Looking at the sprocket, there are 2 bumps and 2 receivers that show you the proper way that they go together. We'll do that assembly later on. So there are very few manuals or instruction pages for putting together these kit bashes. So what I try to do is collect as many photographs as I can of the original vehicle. A lot of them were in black and white, but here is a nice color one. If we zoom into this image, you'll notice that it will show you which wheel goes next to the sprocket. There are 2 different wheel sets. One has a single tire on the outside, the other one has a double tire on the outside. We begin next to the sprocket with the one single tire on the outside. Once you know that, you're golden. But if you're anything like me, and I have put together several of these tanks, I always get at least one of these wheels on wrong. And usually if you get one on wrong, you'll do a series of 2 or 3 before you catch your mistake, and you'll have to put them on over again. I gotta say, one thing I like about the Mato chassis is they have threaded out now these arms that you need to screw into. Previously, when I put some metal arms onto a Hanglong chassis, they were not threaded at all, so I had to go and thread every one of those arms, which was a real pain and very difficult to thread the screws in the first time. So luckily these go in pretty easy. All you really have to do is be careful about how you put the bearings in, and that little detail we talked about before. Do we put a tube in here to be able to isolate those bearings? Something that I think is kind of exciting about building these 1/16 scale RC tanks is it really brings history alive in one way. The Germans were known to put technology first and think about repairs and maintenance later, which is exactly what happened with these Tiger tanks. There are so many wheels and they're overlapping, which allows for a really good distribution of weight. And since this was an incredibly heavy tank, that distribution was very important. Now, the only problem is one of the first really big battles in Kursk, it was in the wintertime, and these wheels would freeze solid into position. Some of the tankers back then said it took about 4 hours in the morning trying to defrost their wheels and be able to chip out the snowpack that would form overnight. Of course, that left the tankers very vulnerable because their tanks were not mobile at the time. This tank really was the pride of the Third Reich. It was introduced to Hitler on his birthday. The first Tiger tank really impressed everybody because it used the absolute best technology. Now contrast this to what the Americans and the Russians were doing with the Shermans and the T-38. They were not nearly as sophisticated, but they were much easier to fix. The Shermans especially, you could replace a transmission in approximately 45 minutes, whereas it took 3 days to do the same in a Tiger. Now, if you've been watching in the background what I'm doing here, I have made a mistake. And I'm going to end up having to take a wheel off because I have missed the proper arm mounting. So, as you see, I did it again. And if you do it, don't beat yourself up, because these are tricky wheels to put into place, and they're also tricky to get them rolling perfectly. Now, if you're really good at this, you could probably put this set of wheels on in about 20 minutes. I, on the other hand, usually take about 40 minutes to put these things on because they always trip me up somehow. Okay. All the wheels are on and they roll very nicely. You'll notice the direction of the arms are opposite on both sides, which represents what actually was on the tank. The rear idler wheels are a little tricky as well because they are in two different pieces, and you have to put the right screw in along with the bearing before you attach the two halves to each other. You got to make sure the thing doesn't fall out. I think it's best just to use your eyes to line up these two holes before you decide to put the screw in. But once you hit one of them, you've got the other one pretty much nailed. And you notice the screw pretty much stays put while you're doing that. Now you just fish a screwdriver into the hole. Once you engage with the screwdriver, you place it onto the axle, and it's actually not bad at all. And you can see the bearings work pretty well. Did you notice what I'm using underneath the tank? I'm using that bag of tracks, which works really, really well as a stand while you're putting these together. So let's take a few steps back and reveal what we've been working on. All the wheels are in place. Let's put on the now fitting upper and lower hull. Snap them into place. And you can see by rocking it back and forth, all these wheels are individually articulated. And now this tank will operate like the real thing over the rocks and crevices. Let's move to the electronics and especially the sound improvement. We're not going to use this speaker because it's pretty small and really not of the best quality. But we are going to use the wiring harness and the plug. We're going to need every bit of the wiring harness, so I don't want to cut it off. So we're going to open up the hang-long housing, get the speaker out, and then cut as much of this wire free as possible. It looks a bit easier to accomplish than it actually is. Using a wide, flat screwdriver, you just wait until you can pop that housing loose, and after that the speaker just comes right out. We're going to save this little grill part, and there's a possibility we can use it to cover up the speaker and protect it. This speaker, although it looks pretty good, it doesn't sound terrific. However, we'll put it in the part box and see if we can do something with it in some other project. Remember that Mato put a really nice floor into this lower chassis. And what we want to do now is take this speaker box that we built and put it in a little bit more permanently. We are going to put it in with Velcro, not screws. We first have to drill a hole so we can get the speaker wire through, and then we're going to have to take out the soldering iron and begin to heat it up. Hanglong always seems to put their tanks together really well, so well that it's kind of difficult to undo what they did. So using a screwdriver to take out the knot that they used, Now, do a little bit of twisting to get this thing so it looks more like a cable. And we're going to use the diagonal cutters then as soon as we fish it through this hole. Okay, after it goes all the way through, we're going to pull it all the way up to the connector. We're going to need to use the diagonal cutters to pull off this insulation. You got to be real careful with this. You have to use a real gentle touch or you'll end up cutting through all the wires. Do a nice little twist, and as our soldering iron heats up, we'll take a look at the location of these wires. Luckily, Visiton has marked their speakers very nicely for us. If you look real closely, you can see the plus and minus. Of course, black is the minus and the red is the plus. I always try to use some very small pliers to crimp everything before I do any soldering, just to make sure that that connection is as good as we can make it. And if you have small, narrow fingers, consider yourself lucky. I have big meat hooks for hands, and it makes some of these delicate operations more difficult. Make sure you don't get any cold solder joints here. The best way to do it is put the soldering iron underneath, let the heat travel up, and then just leave the solder there until it starts to melt, and you're pretty much guaranteed to have a really nice, shiny weld connection. Now make sure when you put your speaker back in, this is the way that I shield the speaker. If I can, I will put my fingers around the screw. What you don't want to do is slip and have your screwdriver go right into the skiver, and it's going to ruin that speaker. Mato includes these little nylon lock nuts along with their kit, and they come in very handy for tightening everything down, and it stays tightened down. Notice here that I'm doing the cardinal rule. I'm actually cutting on a plastic triangle. The reason I do this is I cut very low, at a very low angle, and if you do that, you won't cut into your triangle, and you can see what's going on underneath, which is why I do it. Even though in design school they say don't do that, always use a metal surface. So, hey, let your conscience be your guide. I bought Velcro that did not have any adhesive on it, and that's probably what I should have here. Instead, I'm using two-sided lathing tape, which is about the stickiest substance on the face of the earth. Anything you put down with this double-sided tape, it seems that it's molecularly bonded for your lifetime. You can pick up this very sticky lathing tape at a woodworker store. I'm not sure that you can find it at Home Depot. It's kind of a specialty item, but it's really great stuff. What I normally do then is I take the positive and the negative sides of the Velcro, match them up, and then put them into place and just press it. You're going to have to let it sit for a while because it takes a while for that adhesive to really make a bond. This is the very well-liked Clark TK40 tank controller. It's a very small board. I purchased this from RC Tank Legion. That shop is in Malaysia, but Stanley will get this to you very quickly. If I remember correctly, this board costs about $130 to $140, which when you first think about it is ouch. But it really is a pretty incredible board with a lot of features. For instance, it has an onboard 3-watt audio amplifier and excellent sounds from an actual running Tiger 1 tank. It's the only one that runs in the world, and it's located at the Tank Museum in Bovington, UK. So everything you hear here is just about the most accurate you can find. Beautiful sound, and I think just for the sound alone, it's worth the price of admission. But it also runs IR, it runs the turret, has all those sounds. When you fire the cannon, you'll actually hear the shell eject. It's pretty amazing. We're using the FlySky i6S transmitter in this build, and this is the very small receiver. The thing that's nice is it uses S-Bus, which doesn't require all the wiring. One single line is multiplexed and up to 10 channels can be used. And the great thing about it, this TK40 was designed using one of those FlySky transmitters. So it really resembles what you find on the Tigan and the Henglong tanks, and Mato too, when you first get them out of the box. So it is just about the closest thing to original equipment with a lot more capabilities. Very high quality, and I believe that transmitter is only about $65. The receivers are also very inexpensive. One of the problems I've really had to face while building this tank is there's just not a lot of internal volume once you consider you're putting in the battery. So what I've done with this smoke machine, I have taken off the little legs just to give me a little bit more height, and I have repositioned the receiver that you just saw. I put it right above the TK40 board, and that is going to allow me to be able to put the smoke machine on the mounting plate itself. This is the Tiger smoke machine that has been enhanced from the Hanglong unit. This is version 2, so we'll see how that works out. Now I have ordered a Hanglong unit that I'm going to be fiddling with, putting an accessory pump on it to see if we can get a really nice output of smoke that still looks like it comes out of a piston engine. I'm going to do a little bit of sanding on this grill, and I probably will have to do a little trim ring to make the thing fit correctly. Here are the antennas for the receiver. I'm going to stuff them in the back here. As you see, when we're hooking this up, wires just go everywhere. But I think it's time now that we put on the top and see if we have the clearance that I expect we will have. And yeah, I think we're okay. Great. Let's take a little closer look at the Clark TK40 board and begin to hook up just a few things to it. First up is the volume pot, which goes on port CN4 that we have circled here. You'll see I got this from Tank Legion Shop as well. There's a little plug on the end of it, and all we do, let's put that right into place. You got to make sure you push really hard just to make sure there's a good contact. Now the speaker connector that attaches to the amplifier is on port CN5. You'll see we drilled a hole from the speaker, and there is the port snapping into place. The track motors have two different ports. For the left motor, CN6. For the right motor, CN7. Let's start with the left motor first. We're going to plug up into the top corner of the board. Again, you got to really make sure that you're pushing these things because the contact is not really evident. But if it doesn't pull out, you figure you're in pretty good shape. And the more items that we plug into this board, the more of a mess. It looks like a rat's nest right now, which we will take and we'll harness those later on. For right now though, I'll clip them into the right and left just to indicate which motor they go to, and if I by chance make a mistake, I can fix it later. The smoke unit goes into port CN10, and this should allow proportional smoke for the Tiger V2 machine. Wow, you can spell it fun with a capital F. This Tiger 1 tank build continues again in the next episode. Remember, we have a beautiful new home, fullearthworkshop.com.